By now, you might have heard the news. In order to meet the demands of the European Union, Apple is going to be adding support for not just sideloading apps, but third-party app stores altogether, allowing users to download apps that aren't coming from the official app store, and that official app store will become not the only place that you can officially get apps. This is something that will instantly and fundamentally change the iPhone. How you use it, how developers use it, and how it feels. And I think it's a terrible idea. Please hold your comments until the end of the video. Hear me out. The European Union's Digital Markets Act. It went into effect on November 1st of this year, and its purpose? To set out rules defining and prohibiting perceived unfair business practices by large online platforms designated as important gatekeepers between European businesses and consumers. And though this law is coming out of the EU and will likely result in iPhones in the EU getting this first, it will trickle down and become a standard feature on all iPhones. Honestly, sounds pretty good, right? How kind of them, looking out for consumers, stopping the big bad companies from doing company things. To be fair, this applies to not just Apple, but it sure seems like Apple is going to feel this one the most. On the surface, sure, this is all about allowing sideloading and third-party app stores, and that is what you will likely see it labeled as in the media, but this could also change how Apple's services work. For example, this could trigger sweeping changes to iMessage too at some point. The list of what-ifs is a long one. I'd like to present you with a list of not what-ifs, but more like how many. How many changes can be forced onto Apple before they aren't Apple anymore? Ship of Theseus. A philosophical paradox that says the ship wherein Theseus and the youth of Athens returned from Crete had 30 oars and was preserved by the Athenians down even to the time of Demetrius Phalereus. For they took away the old planks as they decayed, putting in new and stronger timber in their places, insomuch that this ship became a standing example among the philosophers for the logical question of things that grow. One side holding that the ship remained the same, and the other contending that it was not the same. In other words, how much of the ship can you keep altering before it's no longer the same ship? First, it was USB-C, a major hardware change forced upon Apple that is not a very Apple choice to make. And now, perhaps an even bigger change with an even bigger impact that would change the core of what iOS is. It would change what an iPhone is. Here's a real curveball. I'm a fan of sideloading. I'm 100% all for it. Caught you off guard there, didn't I? On every device I've ever had the ability to sideload on, I have done it. Just as with all devices that I use currently, I wish they all had USB-C. Would I be happy if sideloading was on the iPhone? Actually, yes. I think that more options, more choice for consumers is always a win. It's not like I wouldn't be happy if Apple chose to do it. It's that they didn't choose to do it. The government did. I like that. If the government wants to step in when a company gets so big that it starts buying and acquiring all the competition, sure. Fine. This is why the government often tries to step in when massive companies use their massive company money to simply remove competition and, in effect, give consumers one less choice overnight, sometimes leaving you with little to no choices at all. Monopolies that are bought are bad, at least in my eyes. And I think any government anywhere should be able to step in and be like, yeah, how about no. But these changes that are being forced onto Apple were not a result of Apple becoming so big that they started placing limits on their users. For the second time, Apple is being bullied by the EU into changing one of their core principles, into dropping one of their core principles. Aspects of the company that, one, were always there, or two, is one of the reasons Apple is so successful in the first place. It's not like after they sold 1 billion iPhones, they just started locking everything down. The iPhone didn't launch with a universal cable. It didn't launch with USB. It launched with the proprietary and kinda goofy 30-pin connector. The iPhone did not launch with sideloading and third-party app stores. In fact, it launched with kinda nothing but limits. But those limits are what makes it the iPhone. The pros of this forced change: more choices for Apple customers. It would allow developers to finally circumvent the fees that Apple charges for apps to be in the App Store. It would allow bad actors easier access to innocent users. Oh, wait. That last one. Cons would allow bad actors easier access to innocent users. It would also undermine the privacy and security protections that make the iPhone an iPhone. Another con, it would change a core feature of the iPhone, which is simplicity. That one change could affect one user's experience over another's. It would also make developing actually more complicated for developers. See, the reason a lot of developers choose to develop first for iOS and many choosing to develop only for iOS is because of how streamlined everything is. You don't have 11 million different devices made by 11 million different manufacturers with 11 million different versions of forked software to support. The iPhone, iOS, it's a controlled universe for developers to work in. Oh, and that Apple tax that everyone speaks of, that's a 15 to 30% fee that Apple charges for your app to be in the App Store. Not for it just to be there, but for someone to purchase your app or purchase from your app. Keep this list in mind next time this comes up. Apple built the hardware. Apple built the platform. Apple built the infrastructure that hosts and deploys your app. Apple handles the payment processing for your app. Oh, and let's not forget that by being on the App Store, you have instant access to Apple's 1 billion active iPhone users. Access to users that you would never be able to touch on your own. Listen, man, if you want to live in the house, you gotta pay the rent. Them's the rules. Oh, and did you know that this secret Apple tax is also applied by Google? Yep, 30% in the Google Play Store. Steam? 30%. What about something like YouTube? How much does YouTube take from the ad revenue that I'm making right now? Try 45%? You don't see me complaining that that is too high of a fee. Are you serious? I don't have to pay to host my video. I get access to all of you. You get to discover me. And I get to take 55% of my earnings home? For real? The argument is about choice, right? Give consumers the choice. Let them choose to sideload if they wish. Let them install third-party app stores if they wish. I mean, technically, Apple does allow sideloading on macOS. Users have the ability to enable the option to install apps from elsewhere. In fact, I do it a lot. But you see, the user base for a Mac and the user base for an iPhone, they are not the same. There are 100 million active Mac users. There are 1 billion active iPhone users. That's with a B. We're talking vastly different users with vastly different needs on a vastly different device. And you want to talk about choice? Sure, let's talk about choice. The choice exists. It's called Android. It's not like the second you start making money, society is like, all right, you're required to pay taxes and buy this iPhone. No, if someone wanted what Android as a system has to offer, if that was compelling enough for a specific user, that specific user would have a Pixel device in their pocket. The fact that Apple controls the experience from hardware to the software is what made the iPhone in the first place. And yes, when you buy the iPhone, you may very well own the hardware, but you most certainly do not own the software. I would argue that by forcing this to give users the choice to sideload, you're actually taking a choice away. You're taking away the choice the user had for a hyper-controlled platform. I make a tech show for a living. I consider myself a tech enthusiast. And the very last thing that I want is to have to tinker with this thing. It's my phone. When I pick it up, I want it to be predictable. I want it to be reliable. And for me, I want it to be dead simple. Personally, I love the control that Apple has over this thing. That means I don't have to think about it. In a way, for users like a lot of you, I'm happy that you'll have the ability to sideload. I know a lot of you are gonna love it. But man, I hate that it's happening like this. For a company to become so successful off the back of its core principles, just for the EU or any government entity to strip those core principles away is lame. And it is stupid. The EU making any tech decisions for a company like Apple is like letting Stevie Wonder drive your car. Part of the charm of an iPhone is its limits. And when iOS gets sideloading, whether you're for it or you are against it, the reality is it's going to make it just that much less iPhone. This is the second time that Apple has been forced to change something that made it Apple. How many more times can this happen before the ship isn't the same ship anymore?